US President-elect Donald Trump will be inaugurated and installed as the 47th President of the United States of America later today. Since the prospect of this became a reality following the US elections in which he managed what some have described as a landslide victory against his opponent, Democratic presidential candidate runner Kamala Harris, speculation has been rife about what a second Trump presidency will look like, more so because he got a substantial mandate from the voters and the electoral vote system. So what's on the cards and how is this presidency going to affect South Africa and the continent at large? Well, let's get some insights from our esteemed panellists. I'm joined by Dr. Oscar van Heerden. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg. Professor John Stremlau, he's honorary professor of international relations at Wits University, and Professor Roux, he's an economist at the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. So perhaps I can start with Professor Stremlau. Donald Trump's policy positions are all going to be about putting America first, which implicitly suggests to the exclusion of others. What are your expectations after he's inaugurated later today?
My expectations are confused because he doesn't tell the truth. And he has no reliability to pop off and say whatever he's on his mind at the moment. But I'm going to watch very closely the divisions within the Trump camp between Steve Bannon and the MAGA fundamentalists versus the Silicon Valley libertarians that are exemplified by Elon Musk, who is a South African. So that's my my take on the likelihood of the speech in the inaugural address. But I want to say at the outset that Joe Biden warned of autocracy back in 2020. He failed to prevent Donald Trump re-election. And now he's warning about oligarchic concerns, Biden, in his farewell address. So we're watching this with great concern, and it complicates the diplomacy of South Africa enormously. And I want to stress that. But also this is the day of honoring Dr. Martin Luther King. So America is a confusing place normally, but particularly so at this moment. Yeah,
you're right. Lots of contradictions there. So, Professor Roux, Donald Trump has been clear that as soon as he's installed, tariffs against major trading partners will be lifted, which has raised concerns about future inflation. How immediate is this concern, do you think? Does this mean that, for example, the Reserve Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, will likely have to hold off on further interest rate cuts? Of course, they're making their decision towards the end of this month.
Well, all things being equal, it could mean that, and you're quite right. I mean, we have the combination of tariffs, which were inflationary in their own right, and then, of course, the supposed expulsion of hundreds of thousands of so-called, illegal migrants, which will raise the cost of labor in America. So a kind of a double whammy in terms of inflation in America. So that could slow down their drop in interest rates, and it could then, all things being equal, that would result in the dollar strengthening. So from a South African point of view, that would also prompt holding back, as you say, on lower interest rates. I'm not saying that interest rates won't fall in South Africa. I think there's still enough scope for them to fall, but it might just kind of make the drop a bit milder. And sorry, I was going to say, and of course, well, the question is, going back to John, I quite agree, this whole uncertainty. Can he really afford to do both, raise tariffs and eject cheap labor?
Yeah, no, we are going to explore the cheap labor a bit further down the line. Dr. van Heerden, observations have been made about Trump's previous indifference to the African continent in his previous term, even going to the extent of not saying very nice things about the continent. Given his transactional nature, might he have a greater appreciation of the importance of Africa as a partner in different areas, especially as other powerful players work to get a foothold on the continent?
Yeah, Mabandla, the truth of the matter is that Africa didn't even come up in the campaign trail. There was absolutely nothing mentioned about Africa. It tells you where the state of mind of Donald Trump and the team. Having said that, of course, we must make a distinction between Trump and the State Department. I think the State Department knows that indeed China is flexing its influence within the continent, and I think they are clear. They want to counter that. A little too late for Biden to come to Angola just weeks before he's about to exit to try and show that there's some modicum of appreciation for Africa. But the truth is that we are not top of the agenda. But having said that, South Africa is going to feature within the Trump administration's attention, the State Department's attention. You would know that Trump has indicated that those that are trying to de-dollarize and move away from the influence of the US dollar is going to be in his line of sight. He's going to take action against them. And the truth is that South Africa is the weakest link within the BRICS formation. And so we are easy prey with the AGOA and a few other things up their sleeve. So I think we should prepare for some stormy weathers ahead with the Trump administration.
Professor Stremlau, with South Africa holding the fort at the G20 this year and having themes around sustainability, greater multilateralism and leaving no one behind economically, how do you see President Trump engaging with the country? And is there a worry from your side that the extension of South Africa's participation in AGOA could be short-lived under Trump, given his party's strength in Congress?
Sure, that's a risk, and I read the background paper for the Project 2025 by Max Primerkoch, and it was very disturbing because he's calling for a complete shutdown of assistance to South Africa, including the phasing out of PEPFAR. And I don't know whether Trump is going to act on this, but I do have great sympathy for Ronald Lamola and the DERCO colleagues, as well as Ephraim Rasool in Washington, the ambassador. It's going to be a very, very difficult time, and it's worth recalling that Naledi Pandor, Lamola's predecessor, said that the Democrats understand us, and Trump did, after all, lead the charge against the Reagan veto of the comprehensive anti-apartheid legislation back in the 86 period. And so there is a very real difference between Trump and Harris, and it was not, by the way, a blowout. That's Trump's view. It was 1%. Overall, between and neither of them got a majority of the voters, but Trump got 49 and Harris got 48 plus something. But anyway, it's very polarized, and it makes a difference to South Africa.
So, Professor Roux, let's come back to what you were talking about earlier about the plans to get rid of illegal migrants. When it comes to Trump's policy on mass deportations of illegal migrants, which is apparently set to kick off immediately, what are the sort of economic implications for the United States? Because obviously, if the United States gets bitten, the rest of us do.
Absolutely. I mean, unemployment in America, is very low at the moment, which means the labor market is tight. So if we see an exodus of, I'm going to say the word again, cheap labor, then obviously that puts upward pressure on wage rates. Now, of course, for Americans, that's great. That's what Trump has been sort of talking about. I'll get rid of immigrants so that the middle class or the lower working class can earn better wages. That's great, but it does mean, obviously, inflationary pressure. And as I said earlier, that kind of pressure, along with the steeper trade tariffs, could bring about higher inflation than one would otherwise have hoped for. There's also interesting that research across the world shows that migrants do more good than harm in the majority of countries. They bring with them enthusiasm, they bring with them diligence, they bring with them a hard-working ethos, etc. Just as a sort of by the by. So I think, to do both at the same time, raise tariffs and eject migrant labor, is a very dangerous game to play. Just something else to bear in mind is that although the American economy is looking all right, they are facing rising government debt, which obviously sooner or later has to be repaid. At the same time, he seems to be promising tax relief. Now, again, that's kind of a misnomer. You can't really have the two in conjunction for an extended period. So sooner or later, we're going to have to see some way of paying back the debt, and that in turn could also be, of course, disruptive, not only to America, but to the entire world market.
Yeah, I see Dr. Van Heerden giggling a little bit on your comments there. I mean, Professor Roux talks about sooner or later, the US are going to have to start dealing with their debt. I think they've got a debt of about 34 trillion US dollars. That's money that you cannot even begin to try and fathom. So, Dr. Van Heerden, at what point do you think the United States will start properly paying back that debt? And why is it okay for the United States to have such a massive debt to GDP level relative to other countries like ours with a meager, 75% debt to GDP ratio? Why is it that they're able to get away with it? Is it all because of the dollar as a reserve currency?
Yes, but absolutely. It is precisely because of the influence and the power of the US dollar post-World War II. It's the international currency, reserve currency. So, I don't think, I'm having a little bit of a smile because I'm sure Professor Roux also knows that the furthest thing on the minds of politicians in the United States is paying back a debt. That's
the problem.
Exactly. They're going to have to be forced. And this initiative by BRICS and BRICS countries to try and move away from the dollar so that there's more sort of equilibrium and equitableness within the financial system is precisely what Trump and any other president for that matter, even if Kamala Harris came in, she would have taken exactly the same stance because the only reason the America can survive with such a high debt is because of the role that the dollar plays on the international market and in the international system. So I don't think, and I agree with Professor Roux. Obviously, you can't have both ways, but Trump and his team is not even thinking in this complex way. He has made a promise to the electorate, and I suspect that after the signing of more than 50 declarations and so forth, they are going to start the process of mass deportation. That break up families. They are going to fortify the southern border. I think this is going to be the single most important issue for the Trump presidency.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that because I recall in his previous term, I just forget the details, where he was separating children from their families and putting them in some place or whatever. So he's done this before, and I'm sure it's going to be quite a sight for us to behold. Professor Stremlau.
They play with words, Mabandla. They don't want to say they're going to break up families, but they are saying that where the parents are illegal, you are more than happy to live with the entire family, including the kids who are American citizens, which in effect means that they are going to be breaking up families.
Professor Stremlau, given the nature of Donald Trump and his unpredictability in his approach, what strategy do you think African leaders need to employ in dealing with him and his administration, and specifically when it comes to South Africa, given its policy position on Israel and being the one initially spearheading legal action against it? Could this have an adverse effect on relations, or not necessarily? But of course, you have alluded to the fact that you are concerned about relations between South Africa and the US.
No, I am, certainly, because America needs a democratic South Africa, and Cyril Ramaphosa's government of national unity ought to be emulated in the United States, but that's politically impossible for the very reasons that Oscar Van Heerden was referring to. But I want to point out that it's all about money, and Trump is shameless in his search for money. And so what about the Bitcoins that he's going to be selling with images of himself and his wife on them? And he's going to bring in a czar of Bitcoins into the White House. Well, their alternative currency is the Bitcoin. And so that's been co-opted by the Trump administration just simply because it's a moneymaker. And what is Elon Musk and Ramshani going to do with this new department of government efficiency? I mean, that they're going to cut everything to the bone, but reward the oligarchs. So it's very problematic. That this is for the Americans to resolve as best they can, and I'm looking at 2026 with great interest for the congressional elections. But on the other hand, South Africa's got to respond immediately. And I always remember that when Trump called Ramaphosa and in the first administration to complain about violence against white farmers, the only thing he noticed about South Africa, and Ramaphosa told him to butt out. So I think that South Africa has got to take its own measure of where its future lies. And I'm sorry that it's not with the Trump administration, but they will be working on this. And I can only admire the tenacity and hard work of Durko and Lamola and company.
Yeah.
So, I wish I could give you more definitive answer, but I can't right now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. To the other panelists, please don't be offended at my focus on Professor Stremlau, but I think he might be able to answer this question fairly well. Professor Stremlau, I wanted to ask you about the ceasefire that took place in Gaza yesterday, with both President Biden and Trump taking credit for it. But apparently this is an agreement that was in the offing as far back as May last year, but there were finer details that couldn't be agreed upon. But how do you think Donald Trump is going to deal with it? Because he sounded, on the one hand, like he doesn't want conflicts, he wants to stop conflicts. But then on the other, he's also been very hostile and bullish about the actions he would take if Hamas didn't come to the party. So how do you think he's going to behave henceforth?
Well, he's obviously sending conflicting messages, and he does say that he wants peace. But by pointing a former governor of Arkansas, Saunders, to the ambassadorship, Saunders is an ethnic cleanser who believes that Israel ought to be extended to cover the West Bank and Gaza. Now, it's very interesting. If I'm following the money, the Saudi Arabians have made a two-state solution as the sine qua non for recognizing Israel and providing with Trump and his family with the resources that they seem to be insatiable about, but for whatever reason. But I don't know how they're going to square that circle. And Steve Witkoff, who was out there and provided a useful role in brokering this, has to deal with Bibi Netanyahu and the ceasefire that was supposed to be at 8:30 yesterday morning came a cropper of the fact that they didn't have the three young girls identified for the hostages, and 19 Palestinians were reportedly killed in the process because the Israelis play very, very, very hard ball. And we know that from the suffering of the Palestinians. And I'm glad that South Africa went to the World Court, but the World Court lacks power.
Indeed, it does, seemingly. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your participation and your insights. That was Dr. Oscar van Heerden, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for African Diplomacy and Leadership at the University of Johannesburg, Professor John Stremlau, he's Honorary Professor of International Relations at Wits University, and Professor Roux, an economist at the Stellenbosch Business School.